There's some big turnover in the recruiting department.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers today. They all need to stick around for later on because you've got some updates on guys like Derek Colman-Bruse, Esun Tafa, four-star Washington commit, and a couple other guys that we just want to get into that we're very, very intrigued by in the space of this 26 class, which is going to be very important because one thing we need to talk about is, will Washington be able to land a top 100 player in this class? Weren't able to do so in 2025. We'll see what they're able to do in 26. We got a lot to talk about there. And just very important news on that front, Washington's director of recruiting, Josh Omora, he's headed to Arizona State. And we got this question from one of our insiders, Insider Austin, who asked us, is this a concerning thing, just a concerning trend with, Armand Hawkins and now Josh Omora leaving after 1 year at Washington? I say no.
No, not necessarily, because you're looking at guys. Well, first of all, Armand's not a lateral. As long as they're not lateral moves, and you look at Armand. Well, he got a, and that's what I'm saying. Like I think he's going to be. So Omura is going to be like the director, or executive director, or something like that. He clearly got a level. It sounds like a level up.
It's basically a general manager role from the way that it looks.
Exactly, and so now again, semantic titles and all those sorts of things. So it might sometimes read as like a lateral move, but this clearly is a case where he's been moving up. And also, as you pointed out before the show, he was with Nick Rolovich at Washington State before he went to Arizona. So it wasn't like he's been a Jedd lifer like Brendan Carroll, for example, where Brendan's been with him at multiple stops, Jimmy Doherty, multiple stops. And it's, okay, now this is like a guy that I'm, going to be bringing with me no matter what. There's certain guys where it's almost better, especially in like a recruiting role, where you're going to always have turnover, where you're not losing your chief of staff, you're not losing your general manager and those sorts of things. But you're going to have turnover in that department. First of all, it means people want your people. It means you have good people in the building. If you didn't have people that, now if you're going to, there's no shot here, but let's say you go to like a G5 school, or like, it's a lower level, even if it's a promotion up, that is more of a like, hey, everybody's just trying to get out of the building sort of situation, where maybe that was the case with the athletic department when there was a certain athletic director before Pat Chung showed up. Those sorts of moves where you're like lateral and everyone's just trying to get out of the office is a different thing. This is not that. This is a well-deserved promotion for Josh. Well known on the West Coast, so it makes sense that he's staying, on the West Coast at Arizona State. And you look at another name that you brought up, Jake Crawford. This would be a promotion for him. This is where that would make sense for me, where we talked about, would you want to go to an external hire or an internal hire? This one makes more sense to say, okay, well, if you're the assistant director, you could level up to be make it an in-house promotion. Or you can go outside. But I mean, this one would make more sense than maybe an analyst or a QC, the Hawkins role.
Right there, but that's the interesting about this role in particular is now there are multiple spots to fill. So now you can have one of each if you so choose, where it's, hey, maybe we want to bring back a guy for, I'm not going to throw out any names in particular because there's nobody that's, as of right now, that we've looked into that's really standing out for some of these roles, but somebody who maybe has some ties to Washington or has more ties to the West Coast that you can bring back to the Pacific Northwest in that director of recruiting role, and have somebody like Jake Crawford, who's been around the program for a couple of years, step up into that assistant role, assistant director of recruiting that Armand Hawkins was playing. And also, that's a way to levy if somebody wants to take an on-field role as well. It's an easy way to do that. Like that's what Armand was doing as he was helping out John Richardson in the secondary. So there's a lot of really interesting things to dive into here, Lars, and it just kind of plays into the grander theme of the show, which is recruiting in the 2026 class. And this is one thing where you look at it and you say, going to Arizona State, that's certainly a loss for Washington, for this staff, because he was an integral part of it. He'd been with Jedd Fisch for a while, and he's going to a spot where, Arizona State's coming off a college football playoff appearance. Like, they had a really, really strong year in 2024. Kenny Dillingham is doing a really good job down there. So in that aspect, it's a tough pill to swallow. But at the same point, it's something where you can look around and say, yeah, obviously that's going to be a competitor now with what Josh Omora, these relationships that he's developed with some of these guys who can now go to Arizona State and say, oh yeah, that not only is that a college football playoff team, but I already have a solid relationship with these coaches. And now there's somebody else over there that I know in hotbeds for what Jedd Fisch and this coaching staff have been trying to do, whether that's Arizona, Southern California, different places like that. But I look at this and I'm really intrigued about what the future can hold, because as you said, there are a lot of very qualified candidates that can end up filling this role. And it's something where, you bring in Armand Hawkins and Josh Omora a couple of years ago, and now they're off. One of them is on field coach with Bill Belichick, and the other one's got this practical general manager role. So it's nice to see these guys grow. And it just shows that Jedd Fisch is really good at identifying these hot young coaches on the trail, which is a really nice trait to have.
Yeah, and part of it also is, you kind of have to establish, well, what is the director of recruiting role, especially when you have Matt Doherty as your director of player personnel, you have Mike Tannenbaum as your unofficial GM, the GM consultant, I guess, if you will. And then so many other people in that building. You're looking at it, it's still Jedd Fisch's message. So whoever Jedd Fisch brings in, it's going to align with what he wants. You're not doing it and saying, and that's, I think, I'm glad you hit on the relationship side of that piece, because really that's really what this whole sport is becoming about, where you're looking at guys saying, hey, who's got a good established record, who also has relationships, so we don't have to build new inroads. We don't have to go when Kenny Dillingham, for example, is bringing in Josh Omora, that's now a strength for your Hawaii pipeline. That's now a strength for your West Coast pipeline or your tech, whatever you want to do. But the sport is also becoming so just national and transcendent that you can find multiple people. And honestly, this is no side of the Omora or anybody. This is just kind of the natural evolution of the sport. You could also bring somebody in who will kind of evolve that position, or maybe, tweak things, do things differently to where it's like, hey, you know what? The person before me didn't do this. Let me try this. And it helps grow the Washington brand. And it's not a negative that Omora didn't do it, or it's positive that somebody did do it. It's just, well, if good people are going to leave your building, you have to replace them with good or even better people. And Jedd, with his NFL background, with his time at Arizona, UCLA, and then you have to think back, he's also been at Miami, so he's known people in the sport for a long time. So he could go, across the country and get somebody from the SEC, or he could go in-house. And I think, sometimes you hear, where we saw USC just hired Notre Dame's general manager, or whatever you want to call him, to be their GM. Sometimes those are like, hey, it's a great move, it's a this and that. But you should almost have the foundation in place already, to where the director of recruiting kind of just executes the job of the head coach and maybe adds a little more to it. It's not, oh, hey, we are going to rely on this guy, because then when he leaves, now everything goes out the door with him.
Right. And I think that's the interesting thing, where I look at that as the biggest loss in this department, is that it just seems like everybody that Jedd Fisch has brought in, that he brought up with him from Arizona, they all worked really, really well together. And so that's the interesting wrench. I think that's the best word to use here. The wrench that it throws into his plans is, okay, now you have to find somebody else who, if you don't go internal and you want to fill one of these roles externally, that maybe it's somebody you like and can do a really good job, but you're a little unfamiliar with. So there's a little bit of, a little bit of a grace period that you need to make sure that everybody's on the same page and executing things at the way you want to, just at the level you want it to happen at, which is, Lars, it's going to be really interesting in the 2026 class, because I don't know about you, but I definitely believe that Washington can land at least one top 100 player. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at Game Time. Attending NFL playoff games is an experience like no other. The energy, the excitement, and the connection with other fans are unmatched. I remember the thrill of seeing my favorite team clinch a playoff win live. It's a memory I'll never forget. This year, Game Time makes it even easier to create those unforgettable moments with their new feature, Game Time Picks. It filters out the fluff to show you only the best deals on great seats, so you can focus on what matters, being there. I used Game Time Picks to grab tickets for a bunch of baseball games over the course of the next couple of months, and it couldn't have been easier. I found a super deal that gave me incredible value for amazing seats, and I could even preview the view from my spot before buying. The all-in pricing is a game changer. No surprise fees at checkout. Plus, knowing my tickets are backed by the Game Time guarantee gives me complete peace of mind. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets to Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Lars, we're probably going to end up making some predictions at some point during this segment. That'll be just kind of a live in the moment thing that we like to do just to have a little fun there. But I look at some of the relationships that Washington has developed with some top players on the West Coast. And we're going to dive into a few of those names. I think Brady Smigiel is the best place to start. And I say last year it was, I don't ever think it's okay to not, shoot for the stars and hit on one or two of those guys, but it's a little more understandable why Washington didn't close on one or two players in the top 100, a Dijon Lee or an Andrew Marsh or a Donovan Olubade in last year's cycle. I don't think that Washington has that same kind of leeway this year. And I look at Brady Smigiel, Simote Katoanga. I look at some of those guys and I say, all right, you need to bring in at least one of them.
Yeah, and I mean, you think about, well, I guess let's kind of start on the offensive side with that being said, because, you look at the quarterback position, and that's the one that Jedd especially would, hang his hat on, because you got all the receivers in 25. So you can look and say, well, Denzel will be gone, but you still have the majority of that room coming back and young, plus with another year of Damon. So you're thinking, well, we don't need an impact freshman like Damon, but we need a guy who's going to replace Damon potentially after the 26 season. Checks out. Right?
Yeah.
I didn't want to say 25 because obviously he's going to be still be here in 25. But yeah, after the 26th season, you're thinking about who's going to be your next quarterback. And, we talked about on, the bonus show with Kai Horton, you got a young room, but you still want to have that top elite talent because we've seen, exactly with Damon, where Damon was a high 4-star, wasn't a 5-star, but, Brady, depending on which, site you look at, is either a 4 or a 5. And everything builds off the quarterback. So if you can somehow land Brady Smigiel, and the only reason I say somehow is UCLA is going to be there. I know for a fact UCLA is going to be there. Would not be surprised if there's one or two others that are in that top 6 that end up staying all the way until the final 2 or 3. Washington, I think, has a fair shot to be there. The question is just, is he going to be okay? The whole willing to sit, how are you going to balance that? But I think the fact that Jedd played Damon and how he did all that is going to benefit. But everything really kind of seems to start on offense with the quarterback, even though we want to talk about the offensive line more so.
So I want to stay there with Brady Smigiel. With one thing you said I think is really interesting is the question of will he want to sit? I think that he wouldn't be considering Washington if he didn't fully understand the position that he was getting into with Damon Williams at the helm, which is really helpful long term, where, it's certainly not going to be the same sort of Damon Williams, Will Rogers package if per se that Brady Smigiel signs with Washington, ends up here. Like it wouldn't be anything along those lines because of just the skill sets, the plans that you have for Damon and the program moving forward. Like that doesn't make nearly as much sense, but you're still going to be able to, non-conference games, you find a way to get him in there, find a way to make sure that somebody like that has playing time. And it's just one of those things where the cream rises to the top. If he comes in, but Dash Beerley or Tristan Keenan McMillan or somebody else that you have in the room that you really like ends up beating him out, great. You're happy because, we've got this elite talent who we really like a quarterback, but the fact that, Dash Beerley, whoever it is, beats him out, great sign for our development, for our program, for where we are. That's its own thing. And I feel like, you mentioned the offensive line. That's the same thing where I look at Tommy Tofi is the big one out of Archbishop Reardon High School, where that's a name that the more I watch him, the more I say, that's a guy that Washington needs to find a way to close on.
Yeah, especially when you think about having Esun Tafa, who we'll talk about in the third segment, but just, you have him, but you can never have him until he signs. So when you're looking at who you want to recruit in that 25 class, and I think the fact that we were talking about relationships, as I had mentioned previously, like the head coach Archbishop Reardon knows Jordan Palpa from his days in college. Like they played together in college, so there's a strong familiarity. And then you add to it Chris Lawson, you add to it Peter Lang. He's no longer with the program, but there's familiarity with the coaching staff in that high school. So those are guys where you think, okay, at least let's get one or two guys from this high school if there's, let's say, 5 potential, because there's a lot of guys from Archbishop Reardon, and Washington's been on most of them. So you look and think, okay, maybe you're not going to get a clean sweep. And, you look and think Matter Day, same situation where you get Dash Beerley and you get Marcus Harris. But you don't get Nasir Rai, you don't get everybody from Matter Day. And you're not going to, because Matter Day is a powerhouse. But if you can get some of these guys, and I think this is kind of where I want to pivot to, where you talk about the trenches, similarly, Simote Katoanga. Like that's the one where you're talking about, like, if you're going to send the house, if you're going to send, I know you're a video guy. I know you're a big NCAA 24 guy. So it's like, can we just send the entire coaching staff plus,
Well, but that's the fun thing. That's why I left, because they did. They did send out, they sent 8 coaches to go meet with this kid. And it just shows, hey, that is one of the top priorities on our board, where he's the number 1 defensive lineman on the West Coast. He is top 60 overall in 247's rankings. And it's one of those things where the more you watch him, the more it's, oh, you need to get that guy. Where I'll be honest, if there's one player that I could pick out of the top 100 that Washington is in on, that Washington doesn't offer out to, that the one player that I would say needs to end up at Washington is Simote Katoanga, because that is a truly elite talent where you look at that size and it's, okay, you can throw 30 pounds on him. I know he's somewhere between 240, 250 right now, and you can play him on the interior if you want to. That's a guy who can be really physical and hold up strong against the edge. And he also has all the traits of an elite pass rusher, all the traits. So I look at it and I like Lars, I'm serious, where I look at that photo that he posted on Twitter with basically the entire coaching staff, and it's, yeah, they are all in on that dude. It's not going to be easy. Georgia's in the mix. Like basically every national power, whoever you want to say, Ohio State's right in there. I think Michigan, Notre Dame, like all of the big schools want this kid. And that's the one where I look at, just to bring it back to the theme of the segment, will UW land a top 100 player? That's going to be the biggest test. Where with Brady, it's, you've got a really long relationship with him. And you could say that for a lot of these kids, right? But I look at it with Simote Katoanga in particular, and I say that's the position of need, because you want to build, in my opinion, you want to build a defensive line class a lot like you did last year's wide receivers class, where it's talent on top of talent on top of talent on top of talent. And it's where it's almost to the point of, oh, you took another one, where like there's no problem in doing so. There's no problem in stacking the trenches, but that's the kind of just emphasis that Washington needs to have on the defensive line this year. And it starts with him.
So I agree, but I'm really glad you kind of framed it in that way, because Brady, you got Jedd Fisch, you got Jimmy Doherty, you got Brendan Carroll, you got Kevin Cummings, every single person, Scotty Graham, Jordan Powell, literally the entire offensive coaching staff. If they started recruiting him at Arizona, whether they did or not, Jedd Fisch can look and say, hey, look, we have the staff continuity. Ryan Walters did not offer Simote Katoanga at Purdue. There's no relationship. So now you're talking about having to break in Taylor Mays, who was a quality control guy, assistant, not a full-time on-field coach at USC, and Ryan Walters, a former Big Ten head coach who spent most of his time west of Iowa or east of Iowa. So you're thinking about a guy who doesn't necessarily have a ton of inroads in the West Coast in recruiting. That's why Jason Kafusi, Robert Bala, a lot of these guys. And I think that's why being there together is so important, because you could send, we've seen times in the past where it's like the head coach and an assistant coach, or 2 assistants. And it's like, hey, this is the main guy and this is kind of the recruiter. And you look and say, no, it's better to send the entire staff, or like the entire defensive staff or the entire offensive staff, because when you're thinking about it, it's not just sending a message of, hey, we're going to lean on Kafusi's relationship with this recruiter, Bala's relationship with this recruiter, Jordan or John Richardson. But I think that's kind of the whole point of the staff, is Jedd saying, look, it's not about your position coach. It's not about Vinny Sinceri. It's not about Steve Belichick. It's about the Washington football program. We are selling a family. And that's one thing Jedd has emphasized since day one, is it's a family. And I know it's a cliche, and I know every team is like, hey, we're all a family. It's, yeah, but how many teams do you often see sending their entire coaching staff to multiple recruits? Maybe a couple, maybe like a handful, like, hey, maybe this 5-star and maybe this 4-star, where we see Dan Lanning and Tosh Lapoy everywhere, but it's like it's just those 2, like thieves. It's like having the entire coaching staff sends a different message to say, look, we know how valuable you are. We could spread our resources out, because we had this discussion earlier this week about resources. We could send a coach to here and a coach here and a coach here and a coach there. We want to send all of our resources to you on this day, because we want to make it clear, here's our new guy, but here's all the other familiar faces you have. So there's no like awkward first interaction, and which we'll kind of lead into in the next segment, which was Ryan Walters and Taylor Mays have gotten phenomenal, receptions on the recruiting show, shall we say. And I think Ryan Walters was kind of the obvious one, and not that Taylor Mays wasn't, but having that familiarity and being a DC and now and a head coach recently, he's got that familiarity. I think recruits kind of already know who Taylor Mays is in a different way, where it's like, okay, a former player, a guy who went to USC, former All-American, but that's more for the local guys who can see a former OJ guy and say, hey, I go to OJ. Should I go to USC or should I go to Washington with Taylor Mays?
Right. And Lars, that being said, you've got a couple of updates on a couple of top Washington targets. So Lars, You put it out on Twitter, as we record this on Wednesday, last night on Tuesday, the guy everybody wants to hear about, the guy everybody wants to know about, that's Derek Colman-Bruse. You got a chance to talk to some sources. I don't remember if you talked to him directly, but you just got a recruiting update for us.
Yeah, so I reached out to Derek, and I great family, first of all, because Lowen, when he committed to Washington, I remember he was in Hawaii with his family, and Derek was there as well. And he's like, just got a great family, first of all. So they're great with the media, great kids to get to know. But one thing that I appreciate about both of them and what Derek kind of indicated to me is he's going to take his time. He is in no rush to make a decision. This isn't a situation where you're saying, hey, he's visiting Oregon. Oh, he's visiting all these schools are coming in. Where's Washington at? A long game, folks. He's probably going to commit, I would say, between, I'm going to say late July, early September, somewhere in that ballpark. Could even be later than that. But I would just say that's what I would start the clock of when Derek could possibly commit. He's going to take 3 official visits in June: Oregon, Washington, and Ohio State. No dates set in particular, but he's targeting June for his official visits. I'm curious to see which ones go in sequential order, because one thing that he talked to me about was he's really gotten to know Ryan Walters a lot. Like, he's really gotten to break down and get to know him as a person. And that seems to be more what matters to a lot of these kids, which is good to hear. And that's why Jedd is so kind of emphasized a lot of good character people, good character coaches, people that you want. I mean, we talk about Robert Balla all the time, where it's, guys that you want to run through a brick wall for. That's the type of foundation Jedd's building. And so Derek seems to be really receptive of that. He also said even before his official visit in June, he wants to get up to UW for a couple more unofficial visits. So he's clearly, again, he's never going to be the kid, and understandably so, where it's, I'm going to go to every Washington event. Well, he could, but he could also still go to every Washington event and sign with Oregon or Ohio State. He could leave and go elsewhere and do those exact same things. So I at least appreciate how he's kind of being honest and transparent about the process, saying, look, obviously these schools are going to be here, but it's really only a 3-horse race. And, some people, I know a friend of the show, Alex Katzen, quote tweeted me and said, kind of heard, it's always been Oregon and Ohio State, or Washington, Ohio State. And then that Nike check kind of carries. And it's like, yeah, exactly. It's kind of how I would quantify it. Whereas Oregon and Ohio State and Washington are kind of right there. And then Oregon is the one where they're always going to be there for a top recruit on the West Coast and in this area. But I don't know. I mean, I could see it, but I wouldn't necessarily say, hey, he's guaranteed to go to Oregon. So I think it's a true 3-horse race.
So I do agree with you there. One of the biggest factors in all this is his brother Lowen. The fact that his brother Lowen is a UW signee, is going to be coming in here after they did play together at Kennedy Catholic. I think that's, I don't want to say an underrated aspect, because we know it's not, right? Like, it's a driving force in all of this. And that relationship with his brother is going to be something that, if it ends up winning the day, I wouldn't be surprised personally, just from, some things that I know you and I have both heard. So that's one thing just to keep an eye on there, because that's a really crucial target, where that's somebody not only when I watch his film, when you talk to people in the program, outside of the program, just anybody where it's, hey, who is somebody that, that you really want to find a way to bring in? It's always Derek Colman-Bruse. That is always the top name, for good reason. He plays the number 1 position of need right now. He is an in-state guy. You look at the film, you look at the offers, and you say, yeah, these are all reasons to bring this guy in. Like I talk about Simote Katoanga, where that's probably, the number 1 target in terms of defensive lineman on the West Coast, but I don't think Derek is that far behind him. I really don't. I think the size is what gives Katoanga a really big edge, but everything that Derek does, and just all the intangibles, everything that he brings to the table, it can't be overlooked. And that's why Ohio State is banging down his door. Like, that's why Oregon has decided to get in the mix, because they're just trying to get all the top defensive linemen. And I like where Washington sits in there. And just in that race right now, as we record this on January 29th, things can always change, but that's not one I want to say overly concerned about, because I think you and I both know that the most important thing here is the staff recognizes how important of a target he is. And that's honestly, at the end of the day, what probably is going to matter the most. But another guy you got to talk to is Esun Tafa, Washington's top commit right now.
Yeah, top. Well, so again, this was, one thing that I'll be intrigued about the next time we get to talk to Jedd Fisch is, where does he stand in this? Like, Chris Peterson back in the day was big on the second you commit, you're shutting it down. You're not taking any visits. Yeah. You're not considering any other schools. I don't know if you can do that in this day and age. Even like a Nick Saban, per se, at Alabama is going to have guys that are committed and taking visits elsewhere. And it's just part of the game. I mean, I think the reason why I say that is Esun Tafa was on campus at Utah for their junior day this past weekend. So clearly, when he put out a tweet saying like, "Hey, I'll be back for an official visit," but he made it very clear, still committed to Washington, very much firm. Brennan Carroll came out a couple months, I think last month or earlier this month for a visit, and so clearly, and he's coming back up on March 9th for an unofficial visit I think UW is having a big junior day that weekend, so he's going to be up. He wasn't on campus this past weekend with Terrence Sarian, Ansi Snow, a couple of the guys that came up last weekend. So it's not to say that he's not coming up because, maybe he's wavering or things like that. First of all, when you're in for a, elite 4-star offensive tackle in any class at any time of the year, until the paperwork is signed, schools are going to be vying for those guys. I mean, we see how coveted guys are in the portal when you're talking about, what is it called? What's the price to get this and this? Well, guys, if you're in high school, they're going to keep trying until you sign that paperwork, and there's nothing you can do to sign it now. But I do appreciate that, he's being honest and saying, look, and I think that's the thing that Jedd should probably be aware of is you should still take that commitment. That's what I'm trying to say. Still take, if he says, hey, look, I still want to take some visits, but I'm absolutely locked in with Washington, so I'm not going to be going all over the country. Utah's right up the road, because he's from Draper, Utah. So Draper, Salt Lake City, that's not a far trip. My curious thing will be, what other trips does he take? If he starts taking multiple and, setting multiple official visits, then I'll start to maybe get a little more concerned. But I think the fact that he committed so early and has a deep relationship with Brennan and the staff, and I think that's what's going to win the day at the end of the day when it comes to Tafa.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you there. And another thing to keep in mind when it comes to Esun Tafa is he did just get an offer from USC the other day. So it's one of those things where, you talk about schools not stopping to try until guys sign the paperwork. This is certainly going to be the case there, where I wouldn't be surprised if he picks up another few big time offers over the course of now, and let's just call it May, because when teams start to set official visits, different things like that. But another guy that I know you and I are both interested in is somebody who just got his offer the other day, and that's Landon Meary from Princeton High School in Ohio, where he is a really interesting prospect. He's got almost 35 offers now. I think the number's 33, 34, somewhere in that ballpark right now. And there's some big ones in there. There's LSU, there's Michigan State. I know Oregon's in the mix, Texas A&M. And this is a player who is a 3-star tight end out of Ohio. He very quickly set up a visit to Washington, where he said he's going to come out that same weekend of March 8th, March 9th, when Esun Tafa is going to be on campus. It sounds like there's going to be a whole lot going on that weekend, where I wouldn't be surprised if Lars, you and I don't have the spring practice schedule yet, if there's a practice or two going on over that time period, along with a couple other events. So that's just something to keep an eye on there. But I look at this, and it's been really interesting because we talked about on yesterday's show that Jordan Papau has done a really good job of going around the country, trying to expand Washington's footprint. And this is a guy where you look at the recruiting ranking and it's, it's not necessarily a truly elite tight end in terms of the rankings, but I like the film. I like just the prototype and everything that he brings to the table. And it's one of those things where getting somebody like this in the boat, we talked about it with Caleb Smith, where just getting one or two of those guys and they're able to come in and make an impact, it opens the door for more.
Exactly. And that, especially talking about going into the state of Ohio, and we talked, I mentioned Dominic Kirk's comparison and things like that. You can't let, and I know that was Kalen's staff, you can't let guys that end up doing that dissuade you, whether you're a new staff or the old staff, from still going and trying. I mean, look how many schools end up trying to come in for in-state guys from Washington. They don't just stop trying for the top, the top. It's not like Derek Colman-Bruse is just considering Washington because Ohio State or somebody else didn't get a certain player from the state a couple of years ago. It's every year you're going to keep trying. And so as long as you can get probably 1 to 2 guys, because they offered like 3 or 4 guys in the state of Ohio yesterday alone. Yeah. And so you're looking at it and thinking, okay, they did the exact same thing in Alabama when they offered an emo cord, another D lineman, and then Caleb Smith in the exact same day. And then, by the way, it was an Armand Hawkins offer. So you're talking about all these things coming together, and it was John Richardson and Armand kind of equally making that Southwest swing. Everything still falls under Jedd's auspices. It's still run by Jedd Fisch. And so you can replace guys and do all these sorts of things. As long as Jedd's here, the message is still going to be the same. And, kind of slight segue off of that, where Jedd seems to be getting more comfortable. Like it seems like with each interview I watch him do, he seems to be getting more comfortable at Washington, seems to be understanding things. And in the midst of all this change, that's actually promising because you could see where he could easily start looking for exits if he really wanted to. And he clearly wants to build something in Washington. So all the pieces are there. And the guys clearly, I'll be really curious to see how big that visitor list on March 9th ends up being.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that's one of the most important things that, we've harped on it. We need to continue to harp on it throughout the offseason because that it is the biggest piece in all of this. It's Damon Williams, where Jedd knows he has his quarterback. Jedd knows he doesn't have to go out of his way to say, okay, are we going to have to bring in, like XY guy out of the portal to try to hold it down while we develop a true freshman in 2025? No, he knows he has a legitimate building block. And everything else can fall into place around that, which for the 2026 class and 2027 too, knowing that Damon is somebody who can be on campus for all of that is going to be a really crucial selling point. And it expands so much more, beyond so much more than just receivers, than just tight ends, than just offensive line, because an elite quarterback can raise everything around him. And that's what Damon has the potential to be.
And I mean, and you're talking about Damon, when you say cornerback, it's a classy cornerback, Takario and a price tag. It's all these guys that Jedd has built up, and Jedd was the one that found him. And so that's why when we emphasize high school recruiting ranks, yes, the portal is important, but everything, 80% of the roster at minimum has to be built through high school ranks. And Jedd's not going to, I think, wasn't he the one that used the maniacal recruiter term when he first?
Oh, that was Troy Danon, but yeah. It was about Jedd, yeah.
Oh, that's what I was saying. And I think we truly have seen the fruits of that. Danon wasn't maniacal, but Jedd certainly is.
Right. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all everydayers tuning in. And thank you so much for making Locked On Huskies your first listen today. Now for your second listen, check out the Locked On Big Ten podcast. Our guy, Craig Schumann, puts the Big Ten first. When everyone else overlooks it, you can find Locked On Big Ten on YouTube or else you listen to your podcast, which is also where you can find this show. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you don't miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comments section. And if you're audio only, please leave us 5-star reviews. It does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Friday.